This is a 625 carat Willow Ethiopian opal. It's a non-hydrophane variety, which is a little different from the opals you've seen from us, and it presents some challenges for cutting, which you'll see as we proceed. This is a very highly transparent gem, has some beautiful colors in it that I hope the faceting will reflect throughout this stone. So this being a non-hydrophane opal, it does have the problem of you can't leave it out. It's got to be kept wet. So it's pretty much a stone that we're going to cut and show you, and then it goes into some moist atmosphere and you can take it out and show it, but it's never going to be a piece of jewelry. But hopefully it's just going to finish out a really remarkable gem. So I'm going to work on preforming it now and get its basic shape, get some of the excess material out of it, and then dop it up and we'll start faceting. So right now I'm just trying to get the girdle outline of this. Looks like it's going to be kind of like an antique cushion, kind of rounded on both sides. So you got things to deal with, like low areas here, and just got to make an even girdle line all the way around the stone. A lot more color down here. Hopefully I don't cut it out. It's pretty green through most of the stone. So those of you that are curious what I'm cutting with, this is a 360 grit diamond lap. I don't want to use coarser just in case I could cause damage to the opal, which is always a risk. So I'm just trying to get this material out of the crown, and I have a fracture over here I have to deal with, so hopefully lowering the crown and then cutting this in will get that to the point that once I start faceting, it will naturally take that fracture out. So here's our preform, which is basically an antique cushion, probably a step cut antique cushion. And got most of the imperfection out. There's still a little one here in the table that I'll take out later. But I think the shape of the preform is really good. So we'll get really good yield from this, but I had to remove a lot, particularly to get that inclusion out right in the middle of the table. So I'm going to mark this and try and locate the center with the dop. So that'll give me a fairly close to center. So I've got that pretty darn close to center, I believe. So we're going to see if I can keep it in place here. Do this and recheck it. Now let me double check my measurements. Looks good. So get the appropriate size dop. This is not the actual transfer block for the Ultratec V5, but this stone's just too big for, I think, to fit in here. So we'll mix up our glue and get this dopped up and get it back in a wet cloth to keep this non-hydrophane opal moist. We have had experience in the past where this type of material does craze. Even though we bought it in a dry state, we've had bad experience with this. So we'll discuss non-hydrophane opal a little bit later. Looks like that should be enough glue. So you see that I only glue around the dop. I don't glue under it. Just as you'll see later, it's a much easier release of the stone. Doesn't require any heat then, which I try to avoid heat as much as possible. I'll just cut the glue loose around it, and hopefully the opal will fall right off the dop then. You'll see that later. So we've dopped this opal up, and in the process trying to keep this opal moist because of issues I'll talk about shortly, and getting the epoxy to dry. I find out that epoxy has to be in a low moisture atmosphere to solidify. So I just wrap the opal in a wet rag and just had a method to keep it wet overnight, and I think the epoxy solidified okay. So we're ready to take this out of the transfer block. And get it into the Ultratec V5. So let me explain a little bit about the issues with this opal and why we keep it moist. This actually was sold to us in a dry state, but that's the same as this opal was sold to us in a dry state and told that it would be stable. But as you can see, the surface, probably down to only 0.5 millimeter, is just cracked up. You know, this took a couple of months for this to happen, but it did finally crack up. And the assumption is if you recut it, you'll get the same surface reaction. One day I'll at least preform it and take all those cracks out and see if it actually does eventually become an opal that won't craze, but I'm assuming it'll just continue to craze. So that's the same situation with this opal. So we will keep it in a moist atmosphere to try and prevent that. So it's not good for jewelry. It's only good for really a collector, and you know, and you can take it out of the water and, you know, probably for, I don't know how long, but for at least hours and view it, and maybe even weeks. But we're not going to take that risk, so we're going to cut it. We're going to keep it moist, and let's get started. And I'm going to cut this into an anti-cushion, probably a step cut. So the first step is going to be to cut the girdle of this gem. So currently I think it was 412 carats. So we'll see what we end up. I've got a good preform, so I don't think we're going to break that 300 carat mark, but it'll be a big one anyway, the biggest I've ever cut. So I'm going to start with the girdle. So we're going to set the Ultratec V5 to 90 degrees and try and figure out what my girdle outline was going to be. I think I'm going to go like 1 to either side, 3 and 6 to either side on this side, and maybe 1 to either side. I don't know. We'll see what works. So one thing I always do is look for where my issues are that you have to deal with, and currently would be this little bit of low area here and probably this corner. So you do want to confront those fairly quickly, otherwise you're just going to have to recut everything to get these issues out of the way. So I'll start with this corner and see if I can get this up a little higher to where I have a girdle where that chip is now. So I cut into this problem area and I got it to the point that I think there's enough crown, and when I cut the culet, the rest of that little chip out will disappear. So once I cut that, I went around and I matched the 4 matching facets, cut them to the same depth. So the girdle is all cut in. I've cut this side plus 0, 2, 4, and 6. And on this side it's plus 2, plus 4, and plus 8. So here it's on the 0 or 24. And then plus 2 is the next step, and plus 4 index, and plus 6. So that's all in. So now I'm going to start forming a culet. I'll cut this opal. I'm going to try 45 degrees, low refractive index material, so you need a higher angle. So we'll start the culet at 45 degrees. So I've established a culet. So now I'm going to make 3 steps in a step cut. I'm going to go to the 3rd step, which is the girdle breaks, and I'm going to cut somewhere close to halfway up this, and then I'll put the middle row in later, and then actually finish the culet row. I'll probably do the culet row second, and then put the 3rd row in last. So now I'm going to establish where the girdle is going to be with this next row of facets. This girdle step row, the 3rd row, is finished. Now I'm going to go up and I'm going to finish off the culet row, and then I'll put the middle row in. So I just ended up having to recut the entire work that I'd done because I couldn't close the culet. There was a part of the culet that just wasn't cut deep enough, so I had to cut a lot deeper, probably lost 30 carats, but ended up being that the fracture we talked about earlier wouldn't have come out anyway the way I was cutting it. So it once I closed the culet and came back and recut everything, it works out that I just got rid of that fracture, which you can see down there towards the bottom, and it just kind of came out perfectly. So all my cussing about having to recut the stone probably was in vain, because I would have had to recut it anyway if I hadn't had that problem. So just one of the things you run into in cutting stones, particularly big stones. So I've cut the culet row at 44 and the girdle break at 56. So now I'm going to cut the row right down the middle, and that'll be halfway in between, which is going to be something like, well, it's going to be 50. So we're finished cutting the pavilion, and now I'm going to move to a pre-polish, which my pre-polish is actually, we're going from a 360 diamond lap actually to a lightning lap, and this is a 600 grit. This is actually my pre-polish, and from here we'll go on to polish. So we're all finished pre-polishing the stone, and we'll move on to polishing. I think I'm going to hold off till tomorrow. This stone has kind of worn me out. These big stones take a lot of time, and when you got to cut them twice, it makes it a little more difficult. So tomorrow we'll move on to the polishing. I'm ready to final polish this large opal. And what we're using to polish are these spectra laps. They're cerium oxide is what's impregnated into them. So we put it on a master lap. And one thing I do different with these spectra laps is occasionally I'll add cerium oxide to it. This is a paste of cerium oxide. I think this is super cerium that comes from Kingsley North. So I take a little dab of it and put it here in the middle. Move my water out just a little bit and start it just very slowly. And the idea, I don't have my finger there, is when I need cerium oxide, I can just drag a little bit out into the cutting or the polishing zone out here. And it works much quicker, and it'll make this lap last a lot longer. Now these facets are pretty large, so it does take a while to polish. And I use my finger to keep the cerium oxide from blowing off the lap as the water drips. And that's pretty much what it takes to polish one facet. So one more facet left and we're finished polishing the pavilion of this opal. Then I'll transfer and we'll go to cutting the crown. Okay, we're transferring so we can cut the crown of the stone. I will mix up the glue, and I've got a V-dop here on the pavilion of the stone. And I'll glue around the dop. I'm not going to glue under the dop just to make it easier to remove. Then we'll let it seal up and we'll remove the other dop and start cutting. So we've got our opal transferred, and the glue seems solid. So now we're going to take it out of here. And I have to remove this dop. So I only glued around the dop, so I should be able to heat my knife and just pick this off, and it should fall off, hopefully. So this crown will be a step cut, and I'll cut 3 steps, and I'm probably, because I don't have a lot of crown height, I'm going to start at 40, 30, 20. I have a little inclusion in here to deal with. I'll have to cut through, looks fairly deep, so I'm probably going to end up recutting the girdle. Fortunately, on a step cut, it doesn't affect the pavilion I've already cut. I'll just cut into that first step a little bit. So we'll see what we need. I'll start by cutting 40 degrees and get a culet or a girdle line. So I preformed the top of this a little bit so it'd be easier to work on this large table, trying to get that inclusion out. And it's pretty deep, so I'm probably, once I get that out, I'll probably have to cut the girdle in a little bit so I have enough crown to close that table up some. So the inclusion's out. I'll try and figure out whether I need to cut the girdle in. Probably will, just to get enough material to get this table much smaller. So the facets are mostly in. You know, you can see this little divot here. That's the fracture. That's what's left of it. So it's almost out. So I'm going to go to pre-polish with my 1200 lap, recut the girdle a little bit and recut all this. And this should disappear. And hopefully I'll get the table a little closer to 50% width. All right, we can move on to the final polish. As you've seen me in the past, often I cut the table on this vertical, and often I would polish the table, just putting the machine vertical and polishing on here. But with a table as big as this is, that's not going to be easy to do. So I'm going to do as the machine recommends, and that's actually use a 45-degree table adapter. And to do that, we'll remove the stone and remove the screw that holds the stone, and there's conveniently there's a little place for it here so you don't lose it. And put that on 96. So now we're going to set this to go to 45. So it's at 45 degrees. I'm flat on the lap, so now I'm going to tighten this down. So now I'm ready for the stone. and then tighten it into the machine. And then we'll be back at 45 and we can start adjusting it, try and find exactly where the table's at. So as opposed to the way I usually polish, which is vertical at 90 degrees, this at 45 degrees, the big benefit here is you get more adjustments to hit that table perfectly. Often when I'm cutting vertically at 90 degrees, polishing the table, I'll have to polish a little more because it starts from a little bit towards one side, which without that extra adjustments that you have, so now you've got rotational and vertical adjustments, so you can find the table exactly like this. And when the table's as big as it is, this is really what you have to do, and which is actually what's recommended by the machine and the purpose of this 45 adapter. So let's get on to polishing. This is always the toughest part of cutting the stones, and this is a huge table, so I expect to have some difficulties. Come on, be gentle. So you can see, so it looks like I may be getting right on where I need to be and just need to go a lot further. Well, hooray! It's over. What a nightmare that was. Hour and a half to get this table polished. I don't know what was the problem, but I just kept scratching. But we're done. And hopefully it'll be a great one. We'll see you in the next couple of days. I'm going to let it set overnight, and then we'll try and get the glue off tomorrow. And then hopefully by next week, we'll know what we've got. Well, should be some interesting colors coming out of it. I think it's going to be a beauty. Wish it was completely stable. This would be one valuable piece. Here it is, 198 carat Wilo Ethiopian opal, faceted. A mystical beauty with the colors floating within. You know, the only issue with this material is it's not completely stable. So you do have to store it in a moist atmosphere. I mean, you can have it out and look at it for hours, but when you put it away, it's got to be continuously in a moist atmosphere, you may risk the possibility of it crazing, and crazing's usually just on the surface, but it does damage the opal. And this is too beautiful of a thing to take the risk to damage. I want to thank you for watching this video on faceting this Wilo Ethiopian opal. Stay tuned for more videos, and I'm Steve Moriarty from MoreGems.com.